It's expensive, that's sure, but yeah, that's good.
So is this your house?
I'd like to call to order the special meeting, April 14th, 2022, 501 Main Street, 6 o'clock p.m. And I'd like to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Crenshaw, Altaid, Garcia.
Here.
Wynn.
Here.
Hellenthal.
Here.
Andrews.
Here.
Marsden.
Here.
Bryant.
Here.
Greenwald.
Here.
7 present.
Okay, item number 3 on the agenda is to hear the appeal by ADM of their revised permit and the administrative order.
So the order of business tonight is ADM will present their appeal. Jim will give our rebuttal, and then we'll open it up for questions from the council.
Good evening. Can you hear me all right? Good. I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their busy schedule to hear what we have to say here in regards to the wastewater treatment plant. My name is Brian Cochran. I'm plant manager here in Keokuk. With me, I have Michelle Fry. She is ADM's global manager. She oversees the water and wastewater treatment plants all over the globe for ADM. Along with us, Rich Stevens. He is our regional environmental specialist, and he's our technical lead on this project. And Susan Franzetti is our ADM's outside legal counsel. I'd like to start by giving a little history on ADM in this plant. I don't know, last time it seemed like there was some confusion on what we actually did. I don't know if you guys realize this plant was built downtown in the mid-1950s, and it was since moved out to its present location in 1979. It's been in this town for 70 years. ADM bought this facility in 92, been operating it ever since. We're a wheat starch gluten plant. We bring raw wheat in by rail, and we mill it into flour. Then we extract the starch and gluten out of it. It's dried in, and then we dry it into multiple different varieties of products that we package up and ship all over the country and all over the globe. And it goes in food products, industrial use. I guarantee everybody here has some product made from ADM Keokuk in your kitchen right now. I mean, it's been going on for 70 years. ADM Keokuk employs 70 employees. We run a rotating 12-hour shift. It's 2 12-hour shifts for the production, and then we have 4 other departments run 3 shifts. We run 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, all year long. Along with that, we have multiple contractors from electricians, millwrights, all kinds of outside services, temp services. There's a lot of activity in that little plant over there. From my heart, I want to tell you, I want to inform that we've been taking this very seriously. This is a huge blow to us. Michelle will get into the technical side of how we ended up where we're at. I'm gonna leave that to her because she's the expert. But when this happened in February, we shut that plant down for 15 days straight. We did no production at all. And we brought in outside resources, Michelle and others from different entities, to try to address this problem. After that 15 days, we did start up, but we was running a half capacity. I mean, we was trying to keep it limited to help Tom with his wastewater treatment plant while we tried to get ours back in order. We're still at 15 or 50% capacity today. And we're working diligently on getting that corrected so we can get back up to speed and get everybody, wastewater treatment plant downtown in control and ours too. I want to stress that ADM always strives on being the quiet neighbor. And the reason I bring that up is because the people here didn't even know what we did. We like it that way. We just want to stay in the background, do our job, employ people, and keep moving forward. I don't have anything else. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle now, and she's going to razzle and dazzle you with all kinds of technical stuff.
Thank you, Brian. All right, so sorry, but I'm really short, and those are really tall. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just look at my screen in order to share with you what's going on. But if there's any befuddlement on my part, just let me know if we're out of sync, okay? So let's get started with our kind of what happened and what we've been doing since it happened. And hopefully we can share with you kind of what the experience has been from our perspective thus far. So let's look at what caused the upsets that have led to both the NOV-related issues and the most recent, wastewater disruptions. First is that in 2020, our production facility went through some market shifts on product quality requirements. So now we have a plant that's been running very stably all this time, and market demands shifted, and all of a sudden we had to meet new quality standards that we'd never had to meet before. And so our quality team came in and said, hey, we're not meeting those standards, so we need to do more frequent cleaning of our production facility. What that led to was, this one. Told you it'd be befuddlement. What that led to was that we started to cycle the system from highs and lows. Because when you clean a plant out, all of that stuff that you were in the middle of producing, that's stored in various vats or equipment, it has to be dumped. And then you're putting cleaning materials. Think about your detergents and your when you clean out your coffee pot and you use a strong acid maybe to get the calcium off of it, right? I mean, we're putting chemicals through those systems to clean and disinfect them, and all of those are going to waste as well. So it's presenting our wastewater system with variable loading, different conditions, different kinds of water, and it's also presenting us with instability hydraulically, okay? So we were working through this through 2021 when with the quality team and the quality needs basically kept ramping us into more frequent events. So we started maybe once a year when this all began, to quarterly, to maybe every 2 months, to every 6 weeks, and by 2021 we were at weekly. So we are starting that plant up and shutting that plant down every week. And with that kind of operation, it really started to see the impact by destabilizing the plant. The second event that happened in 2021 in the summer months was the quality team identified as a risk water that was passing through our chilling compressors, right, that we were reusing in the plant elsewhere. And he said, no, you can't do that. You gotta get rid of that water. That was a very large flow of water. That was 200 GPM on top of our existing 300 to 400 GPM of flows. And it just, I'm going to use the term, scoured out our system. It led to a huge hydraulic impact on the system. We'll see this in a minute. It completely disrupted everything. We worked within 8 weeks. We had identified air-chilled compressors, eliminated the water chilling compressors, and the system started to restabilize. But we had done a lot of damage by that event on our side, as well as to the city. So with all of that being said, let me go through sort of our timeline with you. So you can see in 2019 period, we're kind of running pretty stably. Our levels are within or below, sort of our average required for the permit. And then we started to see the instability in towards the end of 2020, and definitely throughout 2021 with the much more frequent cleaning events, and then the big event in July, and then us trying to get control after that event. And it basically has just been very unstable as a plant. Since that event, we have not been able to recover stability. So what have we been doing in that meantime? We were communicating with the city throughout. And honestly, our team here thought that those communications were effective, and we were partnering very closely so that Tom knew what was going on when we were having conditions that were leading to upsets, and we were trying to work through them together. We also, tried to redirect some of these cleaning flows that we had been sending normally to our digester directly to the city, so that it wouldn't upset our plant, right? So that we could continue to send basically good water quality to you. And the cleaning water is not high strength, but it is very high pH or very low pH. And so that's where all of our pH excursions were coming from, was every cleaning event we had excessively high or excessively low pH readings, right? Through this time period, we brought additional equipment, like I mentioned, the air compressors, air-chilled compressors instead of water-based chillers onto site. That eliminated that whole hydraulic loading issue, but it didn't take care of the basic fundamental problem of us having to start up and shut down our plant very frequently. And finally, if you look at this period up here, let's see, oh, the mouse doesn't actually have a mouse. If you look at the period after the big July event, when we're still very unstable, we were going into winter. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, okay? Just keep that thought in your mind. So, shouldn't it go forward? There we go. So let me introduce you to the wastewater plant at Keokuk. We have basically water that goes from our floor drains and our cleaning events that go into what we call a wet well. It's basically a big old hole in the ground, properly lined and sealed, but nonetheless, it's a big old well that can hold water. All of the other processed water is basically captured in the plant and directed to a heater so we can heat it up. We call it the PIC heater. It's a little steam injection, okay? We treat that water with some ferrous chloride, actually. Sorry, I was still working on figuring out which product it was, but it's ferrous chloride that we feed to control hydrogen sulfide that gets formed in our digester. So this is a way to control both odors and to mitigate bad gases that come into play. We adjust the pH with caustic soda, which is typical. And then it goes into a digester that has been designed forever, since 1987 when it was built, to be what we call a thermophilic digester. This is a very unusual application. There aren't many of them in the world. It's intended to operate at a very high temperature, about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And it has to operate within a very narrow temperature range around that, like from 138 to 142. That's your acceptable range. Otherwise, you start to kill your bugs. Either direction you go, you're going to kill your bugs, and they die rapidly, okay? So that thermophilic digester has to be able to sustain its temperature. And we went in that direction originally, the designers did, because we have a starch waste, which is a complicated organic to break down. They thought that the higher temperatures would help us do that more quickly. That might have been a good thought at the time, but maintaining that temperature is almost impossible. We have very poor controls in this plant. That PIC heater pulls from our boiler operation, and we have to have enough steam to get it up to that temperature, And then our digester itself is not truly insulated. It's got a very thin coating of insulation around it, but not enough to carry that temperature and keep that temperature in winter months. So remember I said, remember we were entering winter? Well, we were entering winter. Our pick wasn't keeping up with the demand of the temperatures. The temperatures kept plummeting. We couldn't keep it stable. That's why you see a lot of the up and down. And finally, by February, basically the digester said, I'm done. I've tried. I can't do it anymore. And it did what we call souring. So we lost the biomass. The biological activity went away, and we started to see very low pHs and clear water, which is not a good sign. Actually, you'd think black water would be worse, but actually clear water is a bad sign. And we knew we were in trouble and shut the plant down. So, oh, I didn't go through that with you. Oh, well. No, wait a minute. Why did it go backwards? Okay, here. So I had some animation for you. I apologize. So there you go. Pick heater couldn't keep up. We couldn't maintain temperatures. We hit winter, and basically an inversion occurred in the digester. All right. Told you between the months I'd have problems. All right, so here's a quick little synopsis of kind of the key activities and the timeframes for them. So we had our sour digester on February 22nd. We shut down all production. Between then and March 9th, we were working to reestablish the function of the digester. And so we made a couple of decisions about how to make that happen. One is that we had to get the pH under control. We were incredibly acidic. We had to raise it up, and it was very tough. It's a big digester, 3 million gallons, right? You got to raise the pH up in it. We met with the city on March 2nd, trying to understand kind of what the capacity was at the city plant, where if we could start up, we're going to upset you. We know that, you know, what's your capacity? What can you handle? Trying to work through some of that. And then we worked with Tom in the city to obtain fresh biomass, fresh bugs from their anaerobic digester, which they manage their own solids using an anaerobic digester. And so that becomes like a seed, kind of like when you're starting a starter for bread, right? I mean, that's our seed supply going into the digester. And we got many, many truckloads over 4 or 5 days of this seed sludge to try to start up and add biomass to the system. And meanwhile, we were working with our various vendors to try to pull together near-term solutions. How can we quickly move this thing forward into a better place? Not just the digester, but the whole plant, right? Because if we're not treating well in the digester, everything else is going to suffer. And we know from a sustainable operation perspective, we need to do things to improve the quality of water we're sending. Okay? One of the other things we did during that time frame that's not up on the slide is that we made the decision to convert from thermophilic to what we call mesophilic. So we stepped down the temperature requirement. Our wastewater comes out of the plant at about between 95 and 110 degrees. It's hot, it's warm water, right? The mesophilic range is from about 80 to 110 is a perfect range. And I don't have to control it. I'm like, oh, well, this is good. So it's slower though, much slower to eat the food. So it takes a while to reestablish itself. It takes a while for the biomass to build up. It's not as fast as a thermophilic, but it is more consistent once you get it established. And we can handle it more consistently. And one of the key issues that we were concerned about is the variability, right? I mean, the capacity for upset, because again, when you lose that temperature, we'd be sending conditions that were not healthy to the POTW, right? I mean, so we wanted to have a more consistent operation and then work on downstream processes to improve the quality at the end of the day. That was the plan, still the plan. So on March 8th, we invited Tom's team out from the POTW to come and do a walkthrough with us, inspect the site, understand where we are. We got the thumbs up to go ahead and restart the plant, which we did at 50% production rate. Now, I'm kind of not a production person, so I'm thinking 50% production, 50% flow. That's good. Only that's not what happens. 50% production is still 100% of the flow, just 50% of the strength. So it's good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. I still have to process a lot of flow, but I have less organic and solids loading coming to me. And so we restarted the plant. We updated the city multiple times during the restart and during the next period of operations. We converted, as I mentioned, the digester to the mesophilic range. We built a whole new monitoring program to have better insight into the plant's performance. That's some of our challenges at this particular site. We improved the process controls. We moved the cleaning flows from going directly to the city back into the plant so that we could mitigate the pH excursions, so that at least would be solved, one problem solved, which we have done, and that has been solved. We've been adding a lot of food to the digester during the cleaning events. We're making sure they're not starving, because that happens because the cleaning water is low strength, and the bugs are like, well, where'd all my food go? I don't have any food to eat, and they die. So we're keeping, food going into the digester the whole time. And we've contracted with a vendor to provide supplemental treatment capability, which we'll talk more about. Okay? So it's been a very active period. And we have still much more to do. But here's sort of our, Susan, hang on. There we go. Here's our plan to return to compliance. So first, we're restoring the anaerobic digester performance. We're trying to stabilize it. Yes, never mind. You see something different than I do. The spend that we've had to date since February 22nd is almost $500,000 between chemicals, some engineering projects to do improvements, inspections of certain systems to make sure that they're operationally sound, et cetera, et cetera. Plus, we have been paying a significant amount in surcharges because we're sending you water that is well over spec. And that's understandable, but that's also over $400,000 in just 1 month in March. We have made arrangements to get an emergency rental of additional treatment capacity delivered to our site. And by the way, it arrived today. We'll talk more about that. Which was frankly a miracle that the turnaround time could be so quick. It will be commissioned next week and operational for April 28th. It's my opinion that's operational after commissioning, not during. We are stabilizing that operation for 2 weeks at least, just to make sure that, once you kind of commission and start up, things can change and you got to get your dynamics worked out and your operations worked out. About 2 weeks to stabilize, and then we are contracting with another third party to build basically a more permanent solution that will be hardened for winter months, be able to accommodate year-round operations, and be available to provide additional protection for our discharges to the city. Okay? So that's our compliance plan. This is an illustration of the plant with the new improvements now. So you can see many of these things remain the same at this part of the plant, but on the back end, that's where most of the improvements are focused, as we are basically bringing in a rental unit to remove solids from our water. So when you think about the two main issues, there's organics and there's solids. And we have never had a way to remove solids. When we finish treating through the digester, it goes into our aeration lagoon where there's more bugs that grow and chew on those organics, right? And that's what we call a biomass again. And that solids of biomass have been going directly to the city all this time, right? So to get rid of solids that harm the city and to lower the biological oxygen demand, so the organic load impacts on the plant, by taking those solids out, we do both. Because about 50% of our organic load is tied up in those solids, right? So if we can get the solids out and get some of the organic loading down, it becomes a much better quality going into the POTW, okay? So we'll be applying some coagulant and polymer so that we can bring all those solids up and take them out of the system. There's a process of wasting those solids or returning them to the aeration lagoon to kind of mature them as a biomass. It's kind of like returning your starter culture back again to the next starter, right? Keeping it going. And the aeration capacity plan for the lagoon should be improved as we, one, improve the loading to it, and two, improve some of the aeration diffusion capacity that we have, the ability to get air into the lagoon.
I have a question,
Yeah,
real quickly, on your sign here,
yeah,
if I look at it correctly, on page 5,
yeah, it's
you've
different.
changed
Yeah, I did.
the direction of where you're going, and that was my question, and when I seen page 5 is, if you had to have that temperature, why wasn't it going through the pick heater?
It is. It was my misunderstanding originally, and frankly, I got that correction done today.
Well,
and
I was
just
gonna
didn't
say,
correct
that's
the slide
dropping
above.
your temperatures
caught
right
it.
there.
Well, not a lot of floor drainage flow typically is going anyway to the digester, but it does flow through the pick heater. That's a really big issue during the CIP flows that we redirected. So, but we haven't been running the pick heater since we moved it to mesophilic. So now we're running the pick heater again during CIPs so that we can maintain temperature going to the digester. I am kind of shocked at how quickly our digester reacts, right? You think a 3 million gallon tank, when you're running, a couple 100,000 gallons,
Right.
could absorb that without a lot of impact. I'm basically seeing the effective volume of that digester is about 1.5 million gallons, and that's it. And that's because of some of the mechanical issues inside of the digester.
So when you changed your digester over to this design now and to these bugs, did that change your aeration lagoon setup? Is there anything
No.
different on it?
No, the only thing we need to do with the lagoon right now is, well, there's several things that we're doing. One is either we're going to scour out the current diffusers and clean them so that we can get more air out. There, we're good. Or we're going to, or replace them, right? I mean, that's about the only thing you can do. The other thing is that we have that valve vault that you see, and you see the X from the aeration lagoon to the valve vault.
Mhm.
We're closing that exit from the lagoon to the current, because that's your point of discharge. That basically goes straight to the point of discharge.
Correct.
So that we're closing that off so that we don't release water to the city that doesn't go through the solids removal process. Okay?
What's the capacity on your irrigation lagoon as of right now? I'm not trying to get off track here.
No, it's about a 1.2 million gallon.
Has it been cleaned since you guys took over it?
I don't know.
How many feet of sludge and maybe,
I imagine that there's a lot of solids build up in that, but because of the way the water, so the lagoon has it's a square. It's got 4 sloped sides down to a middle cell, which has then the 3 outlets that
Right.
go to these 3 valves, okay? And then to the valve vault. That outlet is at the bottom of that center well area of the lagoon, which means we're sending you preferentially solids, right? Because anything that settles in that lagoon is going right down to where it's discharging. So something got messed up in the original intent of the design to its actualized purpose, right? We're trying to correct that, right? So we'll be pulling not from that center well, but from the water column portion of the
Okay.
lagoon. Okay?
Thank you.
Yep. I just want to share with you guys, you see that rental DAF unit, that's what we unloaded today. I've got some pictures for you, but it is now on site and on our concrete pad and ready to be hooked up next week. Okay? So here's pictures. So you can see, this is our digester, this big white tank here, with the aeration lagoon behind it, okay? And from the aeration lagoon, we're going to pull water and bring it into this set of black tubes, which is the flocculator unit. And then from the flocculator, where we feed the chemicals and we get things to start to stick together, right? And then we inject air into that as it goes into the DAF unit. And so it's like a bunch of micro bubbles come up through those solids, and they lifts them up so it floats to the top. And so those solids overflow into a solids capture area, and the effluent comes off from sort of the middle of the tank, which is a clarified effluent, okay? We also have some new equipment, a variety of things from air compressor to a new pump to pull water out of that lagoon into this whole system here. This will be fully automated, which is lovely. It'll be the only thing in our wastewater plant that has automation, which, yay. So we won't be required to be out there manually changing the dials, right, to control it. So it should be much more consistent and stable. And finally, the near term, the more complete solution by our November date looks very similar, only this whole system will be hardened. We'll actually have thickening for our waste handling so that we're not trucking off solids at a very high water content, but rather much drier solids. And that will help both reduce the amount of trucking that we're doing and, reducing any impact on solids handling. As well as then we'll have, again, the expanded aeration capacity. We'll have, again, a more climatized environment so that we don't have freezing issues over the winter. And we will have a full-time operational support. That is something that, as ADM, we've been missing is staffing support for wastewater operations. We don't have local expertise. We don't have personnel. We run very slim, very lean and mean. So we are looking to outsource that service so that we have people with knowledge to be on site every day, running our programs and coordinating with our ops team on our programs in order to make sure that we stay in healthy shape operationally. Okay? And then I wanted to wrap up with just a few comments. I speak personally and professionally as, the lead person in ADM for water and wastewater, and we are very committed to operating in compliance with all permits, and having this become escalated has been helpful for us to get our eyes on the problem and to understand what's needed and to really dig into solving the problems, which we're also committed to doing. It is not a simple set of problems. This is a very complicated operation. And it's complicated because it's tied to production demands and wastewater system limitations. And how you change one over here affects this one over here. And so we're trying to find the right best practices to bring these two things into synergies, into a program that can be sustainable for everybody. And it's been critical to leverage resources, just to get the right players at the table to look at technically what do we need to do, equipment, what's available in the market right now. Everybody knows we're having slowdowns in supply chain and everything else. I had no hope of us finding a rental system as quickly as we did. So the fact that we're able to leverage that and move that as quickly as we have is a very good outcome, but it is a challenging one to overcome, including people. People resources are very tight right now, and being able to hire and find people that will be capable of performing the work that we need, that's been an ongoing challenge, but one that we're addressing. Throughout this, I have very much appreciated working very collaboratively with the POTW team and hope that we can continue to do that. We are, in my opinion, codependent, and having that very collegial relationship is important to sustaining our success, right? We don't want to be a burden on you, but we also need to understand kind of when we're having problems, how we can work those out. And finally, at the end of the day, I think we all want is resolution. We want this to kind of be resolved, come to some good places together, and to be able to move forward together. So I thank you for your time. And
On the high pH and the low pH that you're having, what are you going to do to mitigate that? Is that going to be at your facility, or are these fluctuations going to end up going to the city?
No. So we've already mitigated that by sending the water through the plant today, but we've been sending it in its entirety to the digester, which is
Okay.
not liking it. So we're going to split the flow, only send a small stream into the digester, send the remaining stream into the lagoons, which is
Okay.
like a day and a half of buffering capacity.
Okay.
It'll handle that pH, it'll neutralize it. And
Right.
We'll be back inside our target range.
I thought I'd heard you say something about that, but I wanted to be clear that
Yep.
I thought that's
Yep.
what you were saying. So.
Yep, that to me is we're trying to make sure we're not overburdening the digester,
Right.
but also managing the pH conditions for the lagoon.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
Question on the product quality.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you had to have more downtime in between the cleanings were becoming more often because of new regulations and new quality standards. So does that mean up until that point that it wasn't good quality?
No, it means that the product, Brian, and you might need to speak to this more than me because it's not my bailiwick, but my understanding is that where the product was going to in the marketplace was changing too. And those different markets have different strata, if you would, of quality requirements. So the people that are now receiving our product have a different threshold of quality
Right. The
requirements.
quality standards changed.
They did
Yes.
change, yeah.
Yes. And they were all tested prior and they were all passing by the old standard. But then it changed. I don't remember what year. It's been a few years ago. And we had to change with it.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So it's always good quality.
Sorry, I'm thinking closing hers, I closed out
Any other questions?
completely.
I have a quick question. You talked about rental units, and then in your long-term plan, I believe I still saw those there. So
Yeah, two different types of rentals. So, the longer-term solution will be with a third-party service provider, providing units that I believe that they must rent, rather than purchase, because it's most likely going to be a 2 or 3 year engagement until we can honestly replace them. So at that point, I think we have other options there. So for them to buy it, it doesn't make any sense. They don't have 20 years to pay it off. Right? So I believe they will also work with other vendors to bring in a rental solution for a long-term rental versus an emergency rental, which is under a completely different fleet,
Mhm.
within these vendors' markets.
okay, thank you.
Go through your plant and be treated then 100% without going to the city? I mean, it'll all be treated before it goes to the city, or is there some of it, like on that one that's showing coming off the sump well?
Through the treatment system at some point in the system, right?
Right.
Gets processed. There are always emergency overflows.
Right,
That
correct.
we want to maintain in case there's a situation where it would be worse if we
Right.
didn't, right?
So the sump well won't, your floor drains and all that won't be going directly to the city. It will,
No, they will
Go
also
through a
either to the
process, too.
lagoon or to the digester.
okay.
Mhm. That is the plan to go forward, correct. It should improve it. It should mitigate the highs and lows that the pH can upset, your own system, right? And being processed with the digester returning to stability, it means that all loads are getting treated effectively for both organics and solids. So, which is a good thing.
I just wonder, I know when we were down there, it's like over 90%, it would be, that going to, I don't say negative, but it's going to go drastically down.
They started pouring, convert to a plant, and, basically use all, other water drains, and we direct them.
We didn't plug the floor drains, they still drain from the floor.
Floor
but
drains go to the digester.
We changed the way the wet well is operated so that we don't open the valve that sends it directly to you.
I would say replace the plant,
The wastewater plant. Yeah, because.
When Michelle's talking about the plant, she's talking about the wastewater plant. I know,
Not the production plant.
no, not the production plant.
The reality is that our digester is at probably end of life. We need to look at investment in this infrastructure. It's not required for us to reach compliance, but it's probably required for us to have a license to operate, right?
I do want to remind everyone, staff table or up here, if you're going to speak, do try to be near a microphone because we are on YouTube.
Okay, I usually am so loud, no one's ever asked me to be by.
The mics are very sensitive, but it
Yeah.
diminishes the quality of the sound and not everything gets heard.
That's fine. Are there any other questions, or should I turn it
I
over?
do.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Hi. You mentioned in the very beginning that your quality care team came in 2020 when quality assurance or when those standards started to change.
Right.
So they brought in a quality care team, and you said that you were going to have that in 2020 that there were going to be different types or kinds of water that were going to be produced
Because of the downtime.
because of that.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you started going through making changes to your systems in production, what did that quality care team go through and look and make changes to your pretreatment at the same
No.
time?
No, so our quality team doesn't think about what happens to what leaves the plant. They're only concerned about the
Production.
product.
Okay, so the
So-
production quality care team came in, made changes,
Yes,
and then there was knowledge that there were going to be different types of water or different kinds of water produced, but then didn't go into making changes into that pretreatment? Is that correct?
The understanding of how these changes were going to impact the wastewater facility were not at that time understood or considered. And to be honest with you, ADM had very limited resources and expertise in wastewater also at that time. And at this plant in particular, we had none. So we were asking them to solve problems they were unaware of and didn't have the know-how to solve.
Okay.
And so, they're doing their best. They were trying. They just didn't understand kind of the nature of the problems.
So no changes were made to that pretreatment, like no upgrades were made during that time frame between
No.
2020 and present.
Beyond the normal fight to keep the plant stable, keeping the heat going, keeping the caustic going, they were trying to operate the plant how they understood it should be operated and didn't understand that these shifting loads was creating instability in the system.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Any other questions?
I have one.
Sure.
During the conversation, I did hear that the thermodigester was replaced. I mean, you went to mesophilic, and you stated in that the digester was old, 1984, and it wasn't
87.
well insulated, so the temperature was hard to control. And then later on, you made the comment that mechanical problems inside the digester might be causing some of the.
Short circuiting we're seeing.
Yes, so is this part of why some of the problems are happening? Is it the digester that may need, I didn't in the pictures see any, like we're going to replace the digester or we're going to upgrade it or anything like that. I didn't see any of that.
In the timeframes needed to come into compliance, we cannot replace the digester. It's a multi-year process, okay? It's a complicated system to build, construct, et cetera. We have to find a new place to build it. We have to build all of the utility infrastructure to bring water to it. We can't just replace it in kind, right, like next door or something, right? So that's part of the sort of longer term, we need to build a new wastewater plant process. That digester will be replaced. But today I have to live with what I can get out of it. So that's why we're trying to make it as stable as we can, even though it may not be as efficient as it could be at the higher temperatures. But at least it'll be stable. You bet. Good. Questions? Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. I am Susan Franzetti. I am ADM's outside environmental counsel, and that just means I don't work for ADM as an employee. I have my own small firm in Chicago called Nyman Franzetti because I helped found it, so I get my name on the door. Tonight, we're going to go through a few legal issues that we raised in our appeal that relate to
You gotta move the mouse.
the February ADM permit amendment that was issued by Keokuk, and that we will show you the way it was issued did not comply with the procedures that your ordinance says you will follow. And that's a theme you're going to hear tonight from me. We just want you to follow your ordinance, and we just want fair play from Keokuk consistent with the terms of its ordinance. So that's the first example. The second example is the March 22nd administrative order, which also imposed new, different discharge limits on ADM. And your ordinance says that's not supposed to be done in an order, it's supposed to be done in a permit amendment. The third thing is that in the administrative order, and this is one issue that your ordinance doesn't specifically speak to. It doesn't give a specific amount of time for the preparation of this type of report. This was a requirement placed in the administrative order. And we don't have any problem with that substance of that requirement, that we do a root cause analysis, figure out what caused the problem, and tell you what we're going to do to correct it. Now, because a lot of time's passed since we submitted this appeal, we have those answers for you now that we didn't have when the administrative order was issued. You've heard a lot of that from Michelle today. But in the administrative order, it only gave ADM 14 days to get that root cause analysis done, figured out, and also to figure out what its compliance plan was going to be. And we had said we thought there was an unreasonably short amount of time. The fourth issue is that goes back to that theme of just follow what your ordinance says when it does speak to an issue. And the fourth issue deals with penalty provisions that were in the administrative order that are inconsistent with what your ordinance says. So let's take the first one, the invalidity of the February permit amendment. And I'm going to step back so everybody understands what the situation was prior to that permit amendment being issued. So we have to go back to November of last year, which is when ADM's discharge permit was renewed. And it was renewed with basically the same discharge limits that ADM had had for a pretty long period of time. And those are summarized in this table. CBOD, TSS, which is suspended solids, and TKN. What I thought was important for everyone to appreciate is when ADM got that renewed permit in November with these limits, which during your workshop, I think you probably recall, were described as being way over your capacity to handle at the POTW. That wasn't told to ADM. We got the permit, it was written by Keokuk, and there was no discussion that these are too high, they're gonna have to come down in the near future. So I just want you to understand that ADM really did not have any prior notice that they were a problem. So then the February 10th permit amendment comes out. Oh. And sometimes it doesn't. There we go. So the February 10th permit amendment comes out. And it substantially reduces our November permit limits. And this chart summarizes that. Most of them, with the exception of the CBOD monthly average, were in the 69% to almost 90% reduction range. And not only was that a severe reduction, but we didn't get any prior notice it was coming. It's not reacting. We weren't told in advance that any permit amendment was needed. We weren't told that our limits were about to go down by as much as 88%. And we weren't given any explanation for that permit amendment. It just arrived. We didn't know that you had treatment capacity issues. We didn't know why a reduction to only giving us 25% basically of what we had before was necessary. We didn't, and still don't know that there are any other industrial dischargers in this town who need the capacity that you'd given to ADM. At your workshop a couple of weeks ago, we were described as your only major industrial contributor to the POTW. So we question whether it was fair to have done this, particularly with no prior notice and as severely as it was done. And in particular, and this is where I come in on the legal side, it's because your ordinance says you won't do it this way. Your ordinance expressly says, and it's quoted here in the slide, that before any permit terms and conditions are modified, the user, and that's ADM, shall be informed of any proposed changes in their permit at least 30 days prior to the effective date of the change. And again, that permit amendment was effective immediately. So we didn't get at least 30 days prior notice, and which leads to the second issue is your ordinance says that if you put in new conditions, new changes, that it'll include a reasonable time schedule for compliance. And you put in much stricter discharge limits here. And there was no reasonable time schedule for compliance included in the permit amendment. So this is a big part of why we had to appeal. This permit amendment caused us real concern that we might not be treated fairly and in accordance with the ordinance. And I want to point out, I understand, and this is this point in this third bullet about the IDNR January 14th letter to you. I've been doing this for over 30 years. I often represent you, just like Mr. Dennis does. My clients include POTWs. I understand the challenges you're under, and I understand where IDNR was coming from. A POTW does have the obligation under the Clean Water Act pretreatment regulations to enforce its ordinance. And IDNR felt last year when your situation at the POTW came to its attention that you weren't doing that. And they wanted you to do it. And I understand that. ADM understands that now. And yes, you should issue, when you believe a discharger is out of compliance with its permit requirements, a notice of violation. That starts the enforcement process, okay? And that's what IDNR wanted you to do. And you have done that. Now, an administrative order can well be another step after that. But it doesn't mean, and I have not seen any evidence that IDNR has said that you had to whack our limits down to 25% of what they were immediately and give us no prior notice of it. In my experience, that's not how IDNR operates. They want you, though, to address the situation with ADM. And there's been reference to your enforcement response plan. Every POTW like yours that has an approved pretreatment program does have to have an enforcement response plan. That's, again, part of these federal Clean Water Act pretreatment requirements. EPA, US EPA, because that's where it all stems from. Even though in your state, IDNR has been delegated the authority to oversee pretreatment programs like yours by the feds, by US EPA. US EPA puts out guidance documents to help POTWs. They put them out for industrial users like ADM too. But the one I want to focus on tonight, just for a moment, is their guidance document for developing your enforcement response plan, okay? And one of the things when they talk about obstacles that you can run into in implementing your enforcement response plan is making the maximum duration of a compliance schedule so brief. For example, requiring full compliance to be achieved in not more than 10 days. Then the schedule is an unrealistic mechanism for effecting remedial action. So EPA is telling POTWs, you got to use your judgment, depending on the circumstances. And if you're too severe, you're going to create an obstacle to your enforcement plan implementation and getting to a resolution with industrial users. So that was a point I wanted to stress tonight is IDNR did not require this permit amendment. IDNR did not tell Keokuk to ignore what its ordinance says. So on this first appeal issue, we are simply requesting that you declare that permit amendment invalid because it didn't give us prior notice. It didn't have a reasonable schedule for compliance. And so we ought to start fresh. Appeal issue number 2 is the fact that I'm shifting to the administrative order and the fact that it contained discharge limits that are not appropriately in an administrative order. We objected. I want to go back a minute. We objected to the permit amendment because of those issues. We had a meeting on March 2nd at our request with ADM representatives and Keokuk representatives. And it was at that meeting we were told that Keokuk was intending to issue an administrative order and that it was going to have some interim limits, BOD and suspended solids, that would be less strict than the permit amendment, but stricter than our November permit, because in part because POTW was going to hold back some of its existing capacity. And we were told that we'd be required to do the root cause analysis and corrective measures report within 14 days. At that meeting, we explained, Michelle was part of that meeting, Brian was, what we were doing, our compliance efforts, expressed our commitment to compliance, and we asked for three things. We asked if we could review the draft administrative order and give some feedback on it. There's nothing in your ordinance that says that's out of line. There's nothing in the enforcement response plans that says you can't ask that for that in order to try and work things out before the final document gets issued. We asked for information on what is the POTW's ability to treat these two main problems here, BOD and suspended solids. So we had some idea of what target we're working towards. What do these improvements have to achieve in order to not cause Mr. Wills to have to deal with upsets, which he shouldn't have to deal with. And we said we needed 30 days to get that root cause analysis report done and figure out the compliance steps and an appropriate schedule, what we could achieve to do it. We then got the March 8th administrative order. That one was unsigned, undated, not a problem. Those things happen. And so you reissued it on March 11th, same order, just signed and dated. We didn't get any opportunity to review it in draft. We didn't get the information on the POTW's treatment capabilities. So we did contact the city and said, please talk to us, as you were told on the March 31st workshop. That permit amendment, that administrative order did incorporate all the other stricter terms and, well, some existing terms from the permit amendment vis-a-vis the November permit, but it did loosen up on the suspended solids and BOD discharge limits. They were now 20% stricter than what ADM had back in November. So the legal issue here, what we're asking for a relief on, is that those new limits, new again, in the administrative order, should not be there in an administrative order. Your ordinance says that discharge limits must be in a permit or a properly issued permit amendment. So again, it's not the right mechanism, and the parties should sit down and work out reasonable terms on that. Going to move to the third issue. And I've already touched on it, and it's to allow ADM a reasonable time to submit that root cause report. This is a little bit of a moot issue because we've given it to you. We did it in 30 days as we thought we needed to get it done right, to get it done completely, to get it done accurately, to figure out a compliance schedule that we could live with and not guess at when the equipment that you saw was delivered today would get delivered. You were told at the March 31st conference workshop that your ordinance only allowed 5 days for this. And I take issue with that. It wasn't explained which section of your ordinance the 5-day deadline was coming from, but the only one that I see in your ordinance that could possibly apply is the slug discharge situation. And that's not the situation we're dealing with. This is not a slug discharge situation. That's a non-routine, it's again, I'm speaking right from your ordinance, and this is how EPA and IDNR tell you to define a slug discharge. It's a non-routine episodic nature, and the examples are including an accidental spill, a non-customary batch discharge. It is these kind of isolated events, these mistakes, these releases and spills that happen and send a slug to the POTW. And your ordinance, as most do, says that within 15 days following a slug or other type accidental discharge, you'll give a detailed report. We don't, based on, I think you can tell from Michelle's explanation of what has caused this and what the continuing problems are. This wasn't a slug discharge. So while you were told at the workshop that you gave us 3 times the 5 days to get this report in, that is simply incorrect. There is not a 5-day deadline for this type of situation in your ordinance.
So you're saying that during this whole event, that you guys never discharged directly to the city and bypassed your digester or your aerator?
No, I'm not saying that.
Because
although
if
I'm
you
not
did, that
sure
would fall
that
under the
even-
slug, correct?
Excuse me?
If you did, then that would fall underneath the slug discharge, correct?
I'll let Michelle answer the
We
first
stopped
part.
discharging directly anything to the city beyond, that didn't go through treatment. When we came back up, everything went through the treatment plant.
And our guys test every day and saw extreme levels, if I'm correct.
Yeah, but that's because our digester is trying to come back into function.
So it went to a digester, it just give an exorbitant amount to the city.
Yeah, I mean, because normally you would get a large removal efficiency out of your digester, but because it's compromised, we're getting maybe 10 or 15% removal instead of 50 to 70%. So that overflow of unremoved organics is going through the aeration lagoon. It's getting reduced a small amount there, but it's not nearly what we need it to be yet.
So with application in November, the permit in November, and the limit that you was referring to there, you guys weren't over that limit of the November permit?
Oh, no,
or
I
you-
think
you
there
was
is, I
over it?
think at least the city has sampling data. We don't do the sampling,
I see.
okay? So, but, I mean, the city does, and the city has told us that it has data results that do exceed November limits, correct?
Your plant manager has filled out forms, signed them, and sent them back. So all of those exceedances that were in your first NOV came from reports submitted by ADM
From
to
your
the
data.
city. So you had data, you submitted it. That's done.
Yeah, I didn't say
The
that.
laboratory did the results, sent them to you, you all
Mm-hmm.
reviewed them, and sent them back to the city, signed by the plant manager.
I see. One more quick question. You guys, you showed us what the limits were in November, and I've seen what the limits were subscribed in that next paper. In your opinion, where should it be? Halfway in between? Just barely under what it was in November? Just barely above what we're giving you? I'm
Right.
just curious.
No, it's the penultimate question, virtually. And the reason I can't give you a specific answer, and the reason that the last piece of the relief we're asking for tonight and in our appeal was order us to the table, order us to negotiate, sit down, a consent order, is that's got to be figured out. I don't
So you don't
know.
already have that, is what you're saying? then?
Excuse me?
So you're saying you don't already have something in mind that we need to
We
negotiate, or we
can,
need to work on
I think
that?
particularly as this new equipment comes up and stabilizes the system and we get data, we will have some idea. Michelle, do you want to speak more to
Okay.
that?
It's a great question. Obviously, that's the end
I'm
game
curious.
here. Yeah.
I'm asking now because I'll forget as we get on into another
Yeah.
question, so I
Well,
apologize.
It'd be great to have data, before we sit down and set a limit so we know what's achievable. And I
Right.
think the best thing is if we could sit down together and look at what the capacity of the plant is for the POTW, what we think we can achieve, and see if we can find a sweet spot there between the two, where we can operate in compliance and not upset your plant, and you can operate in compliance and not have violations, under your permit. I don't know what those answers are today technically. I'd like to have a little bit of time to see how far we can get, with the treatment. But at the end of the day, it's oftentimes the case that we would expect to see revisions over time in permit limits as we look to a longer-term compliance plan, right? So we're trying to get into compliance now. And that means our hands are tied in terms of how much change we can make quickly.
Right.
So we need some interim limits to get to that and an agreement on that. But so I know what what I'm trying to shoot for, right? And then revisit this as we go through time and say, okay, do we need further revisions, right? And if we do, that informs and what am I designing for a replacement plant? At the end of the day, what do I need to achieve, right?
And I totally understand and totally agree with that, and thank you for that. I also don't want to go, don't want you to have our limit on our plant and then say, well, we can only get down to the limit of your plant. We'd like to bring in more industry. We need that space. We need a
Understand?
No, I understand
20%
that.
buffer zone, almost throw off the top of my head. So I'm a little bit leery with going, I'd like to know what you guys can do and
So would
tell
I.
us, this is what we can do in 6 months, this is what we can do in 12, this is what I can do in 5
Well,
years.
I can tell you, we're going to have a 6-month plan to get to someplace, and then it's going to be 2 or 3 years.
Right.
Because you just can't build a plant in
Yeah,
less time
totally
than that,
understand that. My
right?
line of work.
I'm not going to have a new plan in 12 months or 18 or, right?
Be hard pressed to have one in 3 years.
I know a guy who knows a guy. No.
I understand. I
appreciate
do
that,
understand.
yeah. But the opportunity is there to try to accelerate improvement.
You're
But,
gonna wanna up your production if you're only at 50% capacity now, is that
right,
correct?
but with this, so we're at the same flows that will be at 100% production. The strength of the wastewater coming to the wastewater plant will go up. So what we need is a digester be functioning well enough to handle that increased load.
Because you're gonna want to get back to where you were before eventually, I'm
Yes,
assuming.
yes,
So,
definitely.
so that's
And with a
gonna,
healthy digester, we should be able to.
yeah.
I mean, that's the narrow spot in the pipe we're in right now. We got to get that resolved.
I'm trying to figure out a timeline here. So if we do, November was the old permit, right? With those limits where, and you've had those for a long time where it's like 200 and something %. So I want like a timeline, and to be fair, I know that they were over 100%. Is that right? Yeah.
They were at 136% of the capacity.
And one was at like 225.
Yes, so you should know that the 20% reduction that was part of the administrative order is still beyond the plant's design capacity.
Okay, so from then, and then, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. You said that the plant manager has signed papers noticing the overages?
What occurs, what they're referring to is, in your setup, your people do the sampling of our effluent and send us the results. Okay?
And is this just a paper
then-
that
Excuse
you,
me?
is this a paper that you like regularly sign? It's not like a red letters, hey, this is an
No,
overage?
yeah, it's literally the numbers, like from that sample of our discharge. Here's the numbers.
So there
On
was
BOD,
no-
suspended solids, TKN, and then he signs it, accepting it,
Okay,
and gives it, and sends it in. And we were not challenging those.
oh yeah, I just meant like, I didn't know if it was a paper that you're getting that's just a regular paper, if it's
Yeah.
saying, hey, warning, you've been over.
Yeah, no.
So it's not like a warning, and
No.
then February you get the
And
new
that's part
permit.
of what IDNR was saying.
Okay.
Is you've got to notify a discharger when your data says they're in excess, they've exceeded their limit.
So-
And then you've got to figure out with them how to solve the problem.
Okay, that's what I was,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And that's why you don't see us challenging the issuance of the NOV. Okay? All right. Just finishing up in the slug control issue, your ordinance describes what a slug control plan is supposed to include. And you can see from that description, it's not this situation. It's supposed to describe your stored chemicals, your procedures to prevent slug discharges, such as inspection and maintenance of storage areas, handling and transfer of materials, loading, unloading operations, measures for containing. It's all about not letting spills happen, not having accidents, that because you got chemicals around the plant, you've got things stored or you're handling them, and stuff happens and something breaks or gets dropped, and then you get the slug load into the sewer. So it's just our point that we take umbrage that your ordinance only gave us 5 days to do that root cause analysis and come up with a compliance plan. It doesn't. It gives you discretion based on the facts. What's a reasonable time? We worked very hard on that root cause analysis report. You could tell a bit tonight, at least it's a complicated situation. It wasn't unreasonable to ask for 30 days, and we held to our promise. You were also told at the workshop we weren't working on that report pending this appeal. We never said that. We were working on it, and we got it done. in that 30-day time period because we promised you that we would. And I don't know what your reaction is to that. We've not heard from your representatives since submitting that report last week. I hope it's positive, but I honestly don't know. So on the third issue, we're asking you to amend the administrative order so we're not in violation of it. It's important to ADM that we not start out violating your administrative order on getting you the report. So simply change it to 30 days so that we are on record as having complied with that. The last appeal issue relates to fines. I'm going to go through this quickly because it is a legality, but it's an important one. Again, the administrative order said you can assess fines to us in excess of $1,000. Oh, sorry. Advance the slide. Thank you, everybody. That you can assess fines in excess of $1,000 per occurrence per day. And the fact is you can't. Your ordinance says that the amount cannot exceed $1,000 for each day a violation occurs. So the max is $1,000. And you put in the administrative order that you could assess more than that per day. And that's just simply not consistent with your ordinance. The other aspect of the penalty situation is that it provided that if IDNR and EPA find you for your violations of your POTW discharge permit, and we're not privy yet to what those are. We'd like to see that to understand the whole situation. But if you got fined by either EPA or IDNR due to exceedances caused by ADM, that ADM would pay that fine. Now, that may be something that should be considered, but your ordinance doesn't allow you to just impose it in an administrative order, particularly without any protections to ADM that, in fact, what you got fined for, we were the cause of. So again, we're just saying you don't have the authority to put that in the administrative order. And so it shouldn't be there. And I think it's important to keep in mind, IDNR has not fined you one penny. And I hope that continues. And I think it will. The indications are that it will. IDNR wants these two parties to work it out. So does ADM. Keokuk's enforcement response plan gives it multiple options to do that. It is not a lockstep approach, as I think was implied to you again at your workshop, that first you issue an NOV, then you issue an AO, then you issue a fine, which did just happen 2 days ago, which I hope you're all aware of, and then termination of service. That is not what your response guide says you must do in every situation. It has all of those tools. Your response plan is like a toolbox. And depending on the job, depending on the repair, you're going to pick the right tool. And what we're saying here is the right tool, after you make revisions to that AO, the administrative order, not saying you shouldn't have issued that, but the next tool, given you have a company that is trying to come into compliance, who's expending hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it, they're showing you they're willing to cooperate and collaborate with you. When that is the case, for the POTWs that I represent, then they pick the next tool is a consent order. Okay, you've shown us some good faith by your actions, by your deeds, and they speak louder than words. So now let's sit down and try and hammer out an agreement. That's what we're asking you to do tonight. We think that ADM has taken the necessary steps to earn that opportunity. Because a consent order is like a contract. It's a contract by consent between two parties. As long as we agree, we can put things in there that your ordinance doesn't necessarily provide for, because we're doing it by agreement. It's the difference between, you can't shove something down somebody's throat that's not in your ordinance. If I'm speeding in Keokuk and your fine ordinance says, I won't speed, I'll try not to, but if I were and I got pulled over and your fine ordinance says for the speed I was going, I should get fined $50. But your policeman says, you know, you're from the big city in Chicago, Illinois, I'm gonna hit you with 100. You can't do that. It's not right. You've got to stay, well, unless I agree with the police officer and say, okay, fine, because I think you're a good guy, I'm gonna agree to give you 100. There's the consent order. We can do things together that aren't necessarily laid out in your ordinance. So that's the relief. On the fourth one is get rid of these non-compliant penalty provisions that are different from your ordinance. Let's correct the mistakes. You heard Michelle say it. Let's return to a collaborative relationship. I think this problem can be solved if the parties work cooperatively. So order us to sit down, negotiate a reasonable consent order. We wanted to do that last week after we got you the report. We could understand where, until we got that report with all of its detailed information and its proposed compliance schedule, you didn't have the information you reasonably needed to sit down with us. But you had it as of last Wednesday. And so I reached out to ask, let's start consent order negotiations. Let's continue this hearing, because maybe we won't need it. But we're gonna need some time to work out issues like Mr. Hellenthal raised. What's the number? We have to hear what they have to say. And the response was, well, we can, but if we don't have an order done by today, you still have to do this appeal. And we could not be doing everything we're doing and on top of it do that, with the risk that if we didn't concede, someone think it was a power play. We didn't concede to your terms by Thursday and we hadn't spent the time preparing for tonight, then I would have put ADM's interests in jeopardy, and I can't do that as their lawyer. So we said, okay, no, we don't have the resources to do both. We'll do this, and then we'll turn back to a consent order negotiation, commencing that. So thank you for your time. Any questions of me? Appreciate it.
I guess I'd like to say something. Let me get this right. You was flying along on production and a firm, maybe your parent firm came in and said, you've got to change your quality standards.
Right.
And when you done that, then that upset your system. And one of the ways that you thought you could correct that was go to 50% production, figure that out, and then you could build it back up, but it didn't. It didn't correct. It upset the effluent coming to the city. It upset that. And you have not got that corrected to where you're back to where you was.
Partially correct. The Food Safety Standard Act changed a few years ago, and 2 years ago is when we started making changes on our plant on the production side. When I say plant, I want to specify production versus the digester. Mm-hmm. And we went from, like Michelle alluded to, we call it a clean in place. We run chemicals through, shut the plant down, flush it out, run chemicals through the plant to scour everything out, sanitize it. For the longest time, that CIP solution went directly to the city. That's the way they'd done it for years, but they was only doing it once or twice a year. Through all this, we started amping up more and more. We went from once or twice a year to like Michelle said, it was, once a quarter, once every 6 weeks, once a month. We landed on once a week. By doing that, we wasn't feeding the digester consistently enough to keep it alive, let's call it. From there, when the digester crashed, we went to, after the 15-day of shutdown on the production plant, we come back and was running 50% to try to feed the digester to get it back to life. So it's kind of two different things there. The first one's the change in the quality standards. Like I say, we was testing everything before, but it was under a different standard and it was all fine. The new standard is much more stringent, a lot more rules and regulations involved now than there was before. So we had to amp up everything we're doing to try to meet those standards.
I understand that. I also understand that this up and down stuff upsets the production. I want to stress you, at least in my opinion, it's in Keokuk's best interest that you run at 100%, that you do as good a production as you can do. But you also got to understand Keokuk, and I think every town is under the eye of the EPA. We're asking them to suspend having to do these sewers because it's $100 million just for one project. It's $100 million. We don't have that. We don't have that money, and we'd like to keep what we're sending to the river as in compliance as we can.
And so do we.
Okay.
Guaranteed.
All right.
And
we got a good starting point.
Right.
We can go. You're asking us to sit down and negotiate this. Okay. Is anybody against that?
I'm a little bit upset that we weren't doing that in the first place. I was under the impression at the last workshop that you had essentially just said no to the
Wrong.
plan.
No.
So
And we actually went through a spell where I believe it was understood we wasn't to communicate at all. And that came from a group here. And
Yeah,
we were trying to, a little bit misunderstanding, but we stayed in communication with Tom all the time up until a certain point. Then we was told it had to stop.
Yeah, I think if we, you scratch our back, we'll scratch yours sort of thing. I
Yes.
don't know why we wouldn't come to the table first.
If I may, what it is first of all, the communication issue. What happened was on March 8th or 9th that a email came in proposing an immediate solution. And as part of that email, there was an ask for relief on the overage discharge, the overage fees. I deem that to be improper because it was not coming from legal counsel while there was an appeal on the board, right?
This is when that administrative order was given to.
It was around that same time. Okay, and what I felt was that was not the proper communication. I asked Tom to convey, and then that was to them that portion should be communicated to myself and Jim. It was not communicated correctly. We corrected that. We began to speak with them on technical issues between Michelle and Brian and Rich, between Tom, we felt were perfectly acceptable. But there was an ask in there that I believe was part of a negotiation that should have gone through administrative channels. And that's what I wanted to not be communicated directly to Tom. It needed to come to us. Now, we have been, ADM in their defense have reached out to us to work on perhaps doing something other than this appeal. I kept this meeting available because if we did come to a consent order, and Susan is correct, is that she didn't believe that there was enough time to come to the consent order because I wanted to be able to approve the consent order tonight. The reason why I felt that was necessary is because we are continuing to receive high loads from the ADM plant that are placing us in non-compliance. We need to get something resolved quickly because we continue to be in non-compliance. Just from the first week of April, I don't know about the BOD, but I know that we are,
BOD also.
okay.
Both CBOD concentration and CBOD count violated the 7-day average for the city's permit.
In the month of April.
4 violations already for the first week of April.
But how are we notifying ADM? I just find it crazy that they're not getting some sort of,
Email saying you are discharging things that are causing us to violate, and he has been doing it on a daily basis.
Yeah, just to be clear, we get a 2-sentence email that says,
Mhm.
plant's still in upset, stop sending us what you're sending us.
No details.
Well, not only
That, but we've been telling you, I mean, unless you want us to shut that, I gotta acknowledge, that's an option, all right? If we completely shut down, we won't send you any wastewater. But we don't think that's in either of our interests. And so, I mean, I won't repeat everything Michelle said. Go ahead, if you want to.
Yes.
But we can't stop it immediately.
So there's two issues. We can shut down and your plant will return to normal function. But we won't solve our digester problem. I can't restart the plant until I have a digester that works then. And I don't know how to make a digester work when I have no food to give the digester. So I feel like I'm in a catch-22 here. You know, I'm trying to get that digester healthy through a very up and down time right now, trying to get everything stabilized. It's been improving and then it sours a little bit again because of these up and downs. We're trying to get everything so that we are not stressing that digester. We're just getting it fed and getting that biomass to stabilize, to grow and grow. But it takes time. These things are like, how many of you have taken penicillin and completely upset your GI? Anybody done that? Okay, I have. It takes weeks to restore, you know, so that you're not feeling bad and you feel good and everything's like back to normal. Anaerobic digesters are very slow moving things. They don't restore quickly. It's not like turning a switch on and now I can treat everything and it works fine. It just doesn't work that way. I'm waiting for this biology to get to the proper balance points that we are able to digest the organics coming in.
is there something where we work with the EPA saying, you know, we are at the table
Correct.
together?
Correct.
We are aware that the next 2 weeks it's going to be at
Yeah.
XYZ, but by that May 15th date, they've got a rental piece,
Yeah.
it will be under.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a delicate balance. I can tell you what I know, what we've been told by IDNR, all right? Because again, we do appreciate, we're putting you in, that you are at risk. We do appreciate that. I can't say that enough. So in one of the things that we've also done to try and get a finger to the pulse as well as help the situation is reach out to IDNR at times to tell them what we're doing and see what the reaction is. I can tell you there hasn't been a negative reaction. Rich, you had the direct communications. I'm correct in what you've told me. They did last week. Was that when the meeting request came up from IDNR? About a week ago, give or take. IDNR contacted us, they contacted you, your reps, and said, we're willing to hold a 3-way meeting. You know, are you guys interested? We said we were. Keokuk, and you can correct me if I mischaracterize, but from what I saw, you asked what the purpose of the meeting was going to be, and IDNR said, well, we'd like to help improve communications between the parties. They don't think they're that great. And Keokuk responded saying, well, unless we're going to talk about how ADM's going to comply with that AO, we don't really think there needs to be a meeting.
I'm going to correct you on that.
Okay, go ahead.
My response was, because they said, that it was to improve communication. We had just had a meeting with Michelle and I don't know, Brian, Rich, to talk about technical side. And I thought the communication at that time was okay. So that's why I said, if that's all it is to improve communication, I thought we had good communication on the technical side.
Okay.
It was not because we said that they needed to, they
Oh,
needed help
you
us with
didn't,
the AO. That
you
was
didn't want
not,
to discuss the AO? I
that
thought
was
I saw
not,
an email that
that
said
was
that.
not part of it.
Okay, but the point being,
What's that?
Should we not jump at the chance to have the DNR in on that conversation?
We've had the DNR in on the conversations, but if the purpose of the meeting was to improve communication, at that time, myself and everybody else thought we had communication.
May I respectfully add something? Having a three-way sit-down with IDNR helps mitigate the perception by IDNR that there's an issue. It may be that we're communicating great, but if they're involved and at the table and they can see that we're all working together, then that also makes them more comfortable that you've got this. You know, that we're going to come to a resolution and solve our problems.
I do have a question on the fines that we were talking about that may be imposed. If in fact the city is fined because of overages on the discharge, and it is directly related to ADM, why should the city pick up the bill on that?
no, that's a good question. And if a request is made to ADM to do that, along with, I got to, as lawyers say, as long as you can, if you can connect the dots, all right, that we were the cause. I would absolutely recommend ADM consider that. I will take that back to ADM. That's something that can be addressed in the consent order. Yeah, Brian's reminding me, ADM pays a lot of money in surcharges on the BOD. This past month in March, Brian?
$460,000 over what we normally
Excuse me?
$460,000.
$460,000 over what their normal charges are. Now, and this, Cole was alluding to this point that we had made earlier in that letter that got him upset, is we want fairness. If that 460 doesn't cover some of, if there is a fine, okay, then ADM absolutely would take it under consideration. But if it does, if we're paying you almost $500,000 a month, and that some of that can be used to reimburse you if there are any fines, we'd want you to consider that too. It's not a demand, but we're just saying it's got to be talked through. It's just got to be fair. And excuse me?
We got fined too.
And I made mention of the fine that you issued a couple of days ago. Is it really appropriate to hit us for the maximum amount under your ordinance for those violations, for all of them? And to throw out a fine as high as that right now? Is that the response to our root cause analysis report and compliance plan?
I do have,
Because I don't know.
a question.
Mhm.
It's Brian,
Yes.
the plant man. Okay.
Yes.
When you were speaking, you spoke of like once or twice a year before quality, before a couple of years ago, that you would have surges of like cleaning out the system, right?
Right.
During those once or twice a year surges, when you cleaned out the system, did we see direct surcharges to us? Is that correct, Tom? So every time you cleaned out the system prior to 2022 or 2020,
Right.
you knew, ADM knew that every time the system was cleaned, that we were going to be in non-compliance or we were going to get hit with like
No,
a
because the
surge charge.
The averages was still under the limits at the time.
I think you might want to look at that report generated in December of last year. If I don't know if you were on the council at that time or not, but Cole can give it to you. It actually shows the months in a 5-year period that the plant exceeded its limits. And this explains why we didn't see it very often. It was about every 6 months, every 5 months, whatever else.
And they're
The
cleaning.
plant violated its NPDES permit limits. The state never picked up on it because it was infrequent. It's only in 2021 where it was so egregious for the whole year
Which is what I'm alluding.
that
Okay.
you guys got that NOV SNC in January.
So the more frequent, it's Dr. Ed, isn't it?
It's Ed.
It's Ed, okay.
Yeah,
So the more frequent cleaning that they're doing,
right.
and they knew, and well, every time they had cleaning before had caused us to go,
Yeah, and the floor drains and other things else. And let me clarify something here. In 2020, the city was written up by EPA for not having a slug control plan from ADM. ADM sent a spill control and countermeasure plan, and EPA said that's not the same. I will tell you, I have 35 years experience wastewater plants and representing cities and industries in this. So I'll just throw my bona fides out there. Slugs can be exceeding your own discharge limits. That's a slug. It's not like it's a spill, accidental. It can be a slug. High flow, high BOD, high TSS coming out to the city, that's a slug. Because it's not continuous. It's oomph, oomph. That's what a slug is.
Why in the world would we issue the permit in November of 2021 with the same limits if they've been exceeding it for 5 years?
Because we had not done a thorough review of the pretreatment program.
So that's on us.
It is in that December report. You will find that specifically listed in the December report. Also,
So a permit amendment should have been done in December,
well,
not
it
in
should have been a new
February.
permit. And the thing is this, you've got two things we haven't talked about. One's a headwork study. Now, a headwork study was done as per EPA mandate, and I did it in 2015 and redid it in 2019 for Chuck. We did not have the correct total solids design load for the plant. I had to get that from DNR. It was known since 2015, but never included in the headworks. You put that in the headworks, it will calculate how much you can give an industry. It will say, this is the amount you can have for every industry. And remarkably, it's about 45% of the design load for every industry in town because you put in 10% as a buffer, saying, I want to have 10% growth. But we forget the $111 million argument. You have said to EPA that you want to treat first flush down at the wastewater treatment plant so you don't have to build that big, huge tunnel for the CSO. You've got to keep some of the capacity of that wastewater plant off to the side if you're going to do that. Now, I don't know what the plan is. I don't know when it's going to come to fruition. I know it's been sent to EPA and they've sent something back. But I'm just saying is there's just more in this than just 25%. We took 25% of, okay, let's give them 25% of the whole city. For homes, for other industries, we have not done an industrial user survey yet. That needs to go out. It needs to go out to every industry in town and we ask them, how much of the sewer do you use? Then we can come back and say, how much do we need to keep on hand? Now I'm rambling here, I'm sorry.
No, I just think it looks like there's a way bigger picture where we have a lot of work to do on our end. ADM has a lot of work to do on their end, and we're insisting that they do theirs in 5 days and we'll work on our end.
But the 5 days was for the slug control plan. Now, I do ISO 17025 and 9001 auditing. ADM does ISO. They should have had that root cause analysis done within 5 days. They should have had the personnel set aside to do it. They should have had the expertise to do it. They finally did it. That's great. But
Did they immediately ask for 30 days and then
they
we say
said, well,
that they're
they
not
said
doing it?
15 days is too long.
Too
Okay,
short?
Too short.
too short. Yeah,
So
but if this has been happening since the beginning of 2021 and
Why-
2020,
Then why didn't we issue an amendment to that permit before?
well, I'm just saying that should have been caught, but I'm saying also, if they've known about it for that long, why couldn't they've written something up quickly?
Okay, let me jump in, may I, please?
Okay.
Sorry, 1 second. Root cause analysis was not all that was asked for. The compliance plan was also asked for. The time that we needed to do root cause analysis, 5 days, 10, what, we were ready with that. The issue was I was working with vendors to try to find out reasonable timeframes for us to get equipment deployed, site preparation work done. When can I actually execute upon the solutions that we had to propose in that document?
Well, you could have sent it as 2 amendments then.
Well, you didn't ask for that. I'm sorry, but
Okay.
we're trying to comply with what was asked for. And we asked for the 30 days so I can make sure I could have the information I needed to fully comply. And so if you wanted a root cause analysis separate from the compliance plan, we could have prepared that and had a different time frame for the compliance plan. But that was not what was requested. That's not how it was sent to us. So I just want to put that out there.
I'd like to ask,
Can I say something? ADM has paid a lot.
Just pull it closer, there you go.
ADM has paid a lot in surcharges, but that started way back last year. And when we first started receiving those slug loads, and there were a lot of them, there were a lot of surcharges racked up. And we thought that last year, I was really hoping that a $450,000 surcharge for a month, it might have been 420,000, would have brought it to attention that ADM would have addressed these situations. And there for a while, they were back in compliance and things did go well. But then towards November and into December, they just kept going out of compliance. And it got to the point where we were out of compliance so often, and it was evident that the surcharges weren't really bringing things to attention. They didn't, while they somewhat would try to solve it, the problem didn't get solved. And the whole time we're being scrutinized and looked at by the DNR, and it looks terrible that this keeps happening. And then to the point in February, when the plant shut down, they did some things, and I've got to commend ADM for what you have done, what you have set up for the DAF system. I think that's going to go a long way towards possibly solving the problems, but I'm not sure. We don't know. And we were talking about the old permit, the old numbers. You know, we were really hoping that after the plant had been shut down, that things weren't going to be so bad. But in March, underneath the old numbers, there were days when we received 5 times the old limit numbers of BOD. And that's a lot of BOD. And it just overwhelms our plant so much. You know, I understand that they're doing things to try to help the situation out, but we're still getting so much, such huge volumes, and we don't know when it's going to stop. And it keeps putting our plant in a non-compliance. So while there are a lot of surcharges and fines, a surcharge is not an approval to send us overages. It's a penalty.
We never thought it was an approval.
Okay, well, I didn't want it to appear like that.
And it did wake us up. When we realized what was going on, we started scrambling then, but we didn't realize the magnitude of the problem until this digester crashed completely on us in February. Like Michelle alluded to earlier, it's going to take time to get that built back up to where it'll actually start functioning properly, where we can get back in compliance. And we had that discussion.
Right, right.
And we was all in agreement. We knew that.
But I think nobody knew how bad it was going to affect our plant. You know, I understand if we could absorb those overages, those excessive poundages that we would receive, it wouldn't be an issue. we would be able to work with you more, and we wouldn't be so much under the scrutiny of the DNR and the EPA. The EPA, they're not as thoughtful as the DNR. The DNR wants to work with everybody, everyone come to consensus, a conclusion to work together. The EPA looks at you and says, stop doing this now. And that's something we have to think about it. And Ed mentioned, while we're trying to get the approval from the EPA to forego the tunnel project, if they're looking at us and saying, hey, they can't even get things going with one of their industries in town, how's it going to look? What are they going to come up with?
I'm just concerned we've waited till the 11th hour. We've been aware that these overages are happening. They're getting fined or surcharges. They're getting a 2-sentence email once a week, once a month. I don't know. So why have we not before said, we are working on this sewer separation project. We are doing these things. We need to sit down with you or there's going to be an administrative order. We need to sit down with you or we're changing that permit. I just don't know why we are, it seemed like all of a sudden like, oh, that was the end.
Okay.
Just real quick, that's why you hired me in January to help start getting this stuff going.
But you did the plan in December, the report in December?
Well, I was asked to do that by Tom Richardson, and he sent it down to Tom Wills, and I did that, and I submitted it December 15th. You guys got to look at it. Then I was hired on the strength of that report. Right now, it's going to take a while to rebuild everything because people have to digest stuff, move forward. This popped up out of the blue. This is something that we weren't planning on, this whole ADM problem.
Okay, I think that we need to have our attorney, Jim, come to the pulpit and go the other way, and then maybe we can hash out a few things, because maybe he's going to say something that may correct this or that or the other. So, Jim, it's yours.
She's going to clear this off because I'm old school, so you're not going to have to look at anything except me, I guess, which is too bad. But I kind of get the feeling that this appeal hearing has turned into like a counseling session or a negotiation session. Maybe we should have had a marriage counselor show up tonight to help us all get through this. And I feel for ADM. And I hope they feel for the city because we're both in a bad spot. I mean, this whole process started because we got NOV'd, SNC'd by the DNR. So I love all these acronyms, but. So we got to do something. And we got the DNR looking at what we're doing and also EPA over our head, over them, looking at what we're doing. And I think what's important about that notice of violation that we got from DNR was they identified ADM as the culprit. I hate to use that word, but as maybe the cause for our problems. And they said, report back to us within 30 days. Tell us what you've done to let ADM know, or to ADM, to cure the problem. So in that 30-day time period, that's when the amended permit was issued and the NOV was issued. And then Kathy followed up with a report to the DNR. So that's why we're here. I mean, that's the process that started. I mean, mistakes have been made on both sides. I agree with that. Both sides have dropped the ball. And we're talking about time. ADM's judgments and some of the decisions they made went back to 2020 when they had that fire. And that root cause analysis you'll see in there where they started having issues then with their plant and their wastewater. That's been, 2 years ago almost. So that's a lot of time, in my opinion, to look at this and try to figure it out. And I agree that they need more time, obviously. They got to have a little more time. But at some point, maybe it was a good thing we had this hearing because things have got to come to a head. Something's got to get resolved. The city, we've got to take care of our treatment plant. That's our responsibility. It's a responsibility so that ADM can keep going, so that other users can keep going, so the citizens know that we're doing our job. So we've got to stand up. We've got to stand up to protect ourselves too. We've kind of gone a lot away from the appeal, I'd say. And I had thought that we would be addressing more of those issues. There was an appeal issue that was in Susan's first notice of appeal that addressed the notice of violation that they got from us. But I think that apparently from what's been said, that's not part of what you have to even consider tonight. That apparently has been dropped, and they're not challenging the NOV that was issued to them. So now we go to the amended permit. Okay, she's right. She's 100% right. That amended permit should have given ADM 30 days to respond. I mean, it's in the ordinance. The ball was dropped. People have been doing this for 35 years and 30 years. We've been involved in this for 30 days. So here we go. But even though we have a lot of experience, the ball gets dropped. Now, how does that affect the permit? I'm saying to you that even though there was no official notice to them for a 30-day time period to address these issues, they've had more than 30 days since that permit was issued. That was February the 10th is when the permit was issued. So they've gone, they have 60 days, and they finally then did address it with their RCA. But are you going to throw the baby out with the bathwater? Are you going to say, okay, they didn't get their 30-day notice, so we're just going to throw the whole permit out? Or are you going to say, well, look, that's kind of procedural. Let's just say that they've had their 30 days. They've had more than 30 days now. So the permit can stay where it is. So I would think you should consider that. Is that the reason to just completely invalidate that amended permit? Maybe not. Then you go to the AO. All right. So one thing that she's saying is that AO contained discharge limits, new discharge limits. Now, these discharge limits are not as strict as the discharge limits that were set out in the amended permit. And their point is, hey, look, you can't put that in the AO. But I'm telling, from my standpoint, when I look at this code section, 1310-060E, it doesn't actually prohibit the city from putting additional discharge limits in an administrative order. The section says this administrative order may contain other requirements to address non-compliance. Other requirements to address non-compliance. I don't find in that section that allows a city to do administrative order that it specifically says the city is prohibited from doing anything by including any kind of discharge limits in an administrative order. When you look at it may contain other requirements to address non-compliance, isn't that part of an administrative order? Isn't that part of maybe limiting or reducing the amount of discharge that a user is giving us? So I want you to consider that. That in and of itself, I suggest, is not a reason to just take out everything, redline that administrative order. Okay, fines. Now, I agree that there shouldn't have been anything in there about EPA fines being, or DNR fines being transferred. That's not in our ordinance. We can't do it. That should be taken out of that administrative order. But, and before I forget, the fines that you were notified that were assessed recently, those are based on the November 21 permit. not the amended permit, and nothing in the AO. All right, and it's $1,000 a day. But that's on the permit that was issued in November of 21. Okay, so when we look at these sections that deal with civil penalties and fines for our code, they're not to exceed $1,000 for each day a violation exists or continues. And that's in one provision that talks about civil penalties. And in another section of our code, administrative fines, not more than $1,000. But then it says, such fines shall be assessed on a per violation per day basis. Okay. Why doesn't our code say civil penalty, $1,000 a day, period? Administrative fine, $1,000 a day, period. Why does it have this language in there that on a per violation per day basis? When they pass that ordinance, were they contemplating that there could be more than one violation per day? Could it be a TSS violation, a BOD violation, a CBOD violation, an XYZ violation? I don't know. But there must have been some reason why they thought that to put some of that language in there that will allow the city to maybe fine somebody more than $1,000 a day. Now, we have not done that. We have not assessed a fine that exceeds anything more than $1,000 per day. So there's not been any enforcement that would violate that provision that they're talking about. So I say we're still in compliance on all that. I think this is moot now because the AO required 14 days for the RCA. They wanted 30 days. They got it because here we are, they got the RCA. And so I think that's just an issue that we don't need to worry about at this point. One thing that Michelle said that really got my attention was that, especially after reading that RCA, where they've been dealing with this problem since 2020, that our actions really got their eyes on the problem. So whether or not we made a good decision to do what we did, as opposed to getting everybody to the table and trying to work things out and negotiate a consent order, at least their eyes on the problem now. And obviously, they're taking some major steps to bring them into compliance. So I gave them credit for that, but I also give the city credit for taking these actions, even though it seemed to be pretty drastic at the time. But at least we've got some real action from them to address the problem. So I'm going to be real short because I'm tired and I think everybody else is probably tired too. But if you have a question, don't ask me anything about chemistry, biology, mechanics, or engineering. Otherwise, I'm just going to sit down and let you guys decide what you want to do.
What is your suggestion then, that we come back to the table and negotiate with this consent agreement? Is that how we move forward from this point?
It's an
Or I kinda
option
get
that you can do. I mean, that's an option.
Because I think that ADM's willing to work with the city, and I think the city should work with ADM.
I think you're right. And I do applaud Tom and Michelle for being in communication all the time. I mean, I see some of those emails, and I know that they are trying to keep each other advised of what's going on. If you're considering a direction for negotiation, though, I would certainly want to say that we don't want it to go on very long. We want it to have like a time limit on it, get something done. Iron these problems out, yeah.
So at this point, you can continue the questioning, but your decision here tonight is to either grant or deny in whole or in part the appeal. So the four issues, and I believe as Jim has said, and even Susan has said, that one of them is kind of a moot point because they've already submitted the RCA. One, declare the permit amendment invalid. Two, provide relief on the new limits in the AO as far as the discharge. Three, which was the RCA, and four, the exceedance of $1,000 a day in fines and the passing of the fines, any fines from EPA and DNR. That also may be a moot point because legal counsel has stated that that ADM is correct in that we can't do more than $1,000 per day per incident, and that we cannot pass along the any fines that we receive from IDNR or EPA. So those are the issues that you can declare, again, either grant or deny in whole or in part. And then there is the request to proceed on negotiations of a consent order, which is something that you can also vote on tonight.
So we're still doing discussion, correct? Okay. So one of my questions comes to, and I understand number 4, the appeal, when we talk about the fines and stuff like that, and I understand what Jim was saying. This is just a question that comes off the top of my head. So I did that walkabout with Councilman Garcia down there when we first got on. And she mentioned several times before that we were told that 90% of what comes into the wastewater treatment plant comes from ADM. So if 90% of what comes from ADM, 90% of what comes into our wastewater treatment plant comes from ADM, if we were to get fined, I understand we cannot pass that on to them, but if we were to get fined by the EPA or the DNR, let's just say that happened, and I know it's a what if, the surcharges that they're giving us, because that was stated by Brian that in this month alone, they gave us $500,000. Those surcharges, I assume, are already being used to make up for what happened with our system, or would that make potentially, we wouldn't know the fines from the EPA or anything. How would we make up that money? How would we go propose? Are we going to have to tax our citizens? Are we going to have to?
What I can tell you is that depending upon the fine, because we do not know what they would fine us, right? And right now, yes, the surcharges could easily cover a fine.
Okay.
But if the surcharges or if the waste stream continues even at a reduced level and still places it out of compliance, what it is that as the amount of overreach is reduced, the fine could be exceeded. Then at that point, then it has to come from the general revenue of the sewer fees.
I'd like some clarification on item number 4, the fines imposed by the AO. Susan, your argument was that there was a part of code that said it could only be a fine of $1,000 per day. And then Jim, your counter argument was a different part of the code that said it could be $1,000 per day per incident, per violation per day. In actuality, the fine that was levied in the AO, was that at the 1,000 per day per violation?
We didn't issue a fine as part of the AO. We issued a fine, and council was made aware of that, that was for the month of March, based upon the waste stream and the loadings that we received during the month of March from ADM.
So that fine that we got the email about this week, was that at the 1,000 per,
1,000 per day.
but not
Per
in
occurrence.
violation?
Per occurrence, per violation, however it is. So there's certain things that we test for that are only going to be per day.
Mhm.
There are other things that we test for that could be per violation, being that at different times of the day, there may be a violation, but based upon how we're testing. One of those could be pH.
Add in also, there is another line in that. If you violate a monthly, you cause the city, or you violate your permit monthly, you're billed for every day of that month. It counts for the whole month. So there were 31 days in March. So if you caused a monthly violation, that was $31,000 because it's for the month, it's for the whole month. So the whole month applies to it. So that's also in the city ordinance.
How many times a day do we test?
Depends on what for. Test for suspended solids, total suspended solids concentration, poundage, same thing with BOD, pH, and also, what else?
Which one? For ADM or for?
For ADM.
ADM, TSS, BOD, pH, okay, for ADM. And that's
test-
both poundage and concentration. Poundage is what they are regulated on. For the city, you test for concentration and poundages. So if you cause a CBOD violation at the wastewater plant because what you discharged caused the city to violate it, that's $2,000 for both concentration and BOD if you go over it. It's also now, if it's TSS, concentration in pounds, then you have E. coli. E. coli says exactly how well have you disinfected that water leaving the plant. And you don't want high E. coli leaving the plant because it goes downstream where people fish. So those, they test 5 times in a month. They get a monthly geometric mean. That happened in March. They failed E. coli for 31 days. And if the TSS loads continue on the way they are coming into the plant, they will fail their E. coli disinfection for this month.
E. coli is not a major contributor from industrial wastewater. It's a human pathogen, right? I mean,
Well, the thing is,
well, hang on.
all right, okay.
So I don't know if we were fined for the E. coli or not. I'm not speaking to that, but in general, just the science of it, we don't send you E. coli.
No, you
But
don't.
if you're not able to disinfect because
Right.
the BOD is too high or something, you can't carry a disinfectant effectively, that's another issue. Now, you just turned on your UV system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you should be operating with an ultraviolet disinfection process.
Correct.
I don't know if the solids are interfering with
Yes,
that.
yes, and that's it. The solids that were going out due to ADM's violations caused us to have the bacteria violations.
There's not enough UV light penetrating.
I understand
to the
what the
center,
UV
right?
principles. Yeah.
I'm explaining it to the council. There's not enough UV light penetrating to the center because it's cloudy. Just imagine if you have dirt all over your window. Yeah, yeah.
Did we get a
Can I
outline
just
of
make
what
the
the?
point? We are not here tonight to respond to the fine. Okay, I don't want you to think that that's what we're doing here tonight. I'm hoping maybe we can resolve that if we're across the table. But I will just add that I've just finished representing a community in Indiana, similar to you, for sewer overflow issues. They've had, and it's a consent decree with your friends EPA, Department of Justice, and the state of Indiana. It's gone on for years. They got a similar problem what you got. They don't have the capacity. And the complaint that got filed with the consent decree, you probably know the drill, probably happened to you, complaint along with your settlement agreement, alleged over 257 sewer overflow events by my client. Many of those lasted more than a day. That fine was far less than what you've just fined these people for a matter of a couple of weeks. So understand, that's where I'm coming from in saying this punishment mode that you're on is not productive, especially when you consider what this company is paying on surcharges. And again, as I said earlier, I'm not saying that we don't have to comply. It's the tactics that I just don't understand.
Sorry, Councilmember Greenwald's question. So we're not voting on the appeal of the fines
So
or
that
just
was-
the wording?
That was my misunderstanding, because I thought item number 4 was about the fines, and
I thought so
suppose
too.
that was the limit of fines or something.
So we would just be
And-
granting
and-
or not granting the wording?
Yeah, the direction of my question was ultimately, I just wanted to know if any fines that we had leveled we were following what we were saying under Jim's, or if we were following what she was arguing for, the
Or-
1 per day versus the 1 occurrence.
We're following under his though, right? It's more than 1,000, or it's 1,000 per occurrence per day?
So Susan was saying, yes, it's $1,000 cap per day event, whatever the frequency of non-compliance is. If it's multiple parameters, it's 1,000 per parameter, right? That's not the problem of how many parameters or days. It's a cap at 1,000.
It was the
per-
wording, ours said
and the
exceeds
wording says
1,000,
excess
okay.
of 1,000 per, instead of
Okay.
capped at 1,000.
In your AO.
In your
Just say,
AO.
we
Okay.
can fine you more than 1,000 a day.
Okay.
No limits. Doesn't have to be that there's multiple, gyms inserted. That's not in the AO.
Could I say something here? And just adding that this isn't something that's crept up on us, like it's all of a sudden, oh, we're out of compliance. This is a problem. It's been going on through 2021, and it came to a head in February when the plant their digester soured. And mention was made of my emails. I knew that they were aware of the situation, and they knew that we're aware of the situation. But I needed to get some kind of daily reminder, and that's why I sent those emails, and I'll read you one of them, because it's not just a pass over two-sentence things. And it's addressed to the fellow who's supposed to be our contact. And I said, Mel, further review of data has shown and is showing ADM is sending substance causing pass-through or interference at the Keokuk Wastewater Plant, putting us into violation of our NPDES permit. It is vital that ADM investigates, identifies, and stops sending whatever it is that is causing our violations. These steps are necessary in order to avoid further regulatory action by the city of Keokuk. And I thought that was a good daily reminder of where we're at and what we're wanting ADM to do ultimately.
With those daily reminders, what was sent back to you? On a daily basis, when you send that, when it happens, what is sent back to you?
Those go to Mel and Brian. I'll see.
So it would have been Mel responding. I'm just doing a search here. So it would have been Mel responding.
Yeah.
Rich Stevens.
Aside from the surcharges, have there ever been any other consequences that the city imposes?
No, prior to these fines.
So this is the first time they've ever had a
First time.
consequence aside from the surcharge?
And I'd like to toss something in. Everybody throws surcharge out like it's something special. No, we don't. Okay, it was red. Okay, so you have an electrical connection to your house. And there's certain times of the day that's the low power usage and you get a better price on electricity. But if you run your dryer at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the evening to electric dryer, you pay a higher electrical bill. That's what the electrical company calls a surcharge. It's above what you've been given at a set rate, and you pay more for it. I pay for it in my laboratory. I get two lines from REC, the flat rate and then the surcharge rate. That's what a surcharge is. A surcharge is payment for the use of your collection system in exceedance of the permit limits, and payments for the wastewater plant to treat it, including electricity, wear and tear on the pumps. And just to let you know, one of your digesters is down right now. It's needing repair. So all of that is what a surcharge pays for. It's not like it's extra money. It's payment for above and beyond what you were given to begin with.
Yeah, I just asked because if I got a letter from my electric company every month saying, hey, you forgot to pay me, but they never shut me off, I'm never going to pay them.
Well, I actually, when I was younger and didn't have enough money, I had my phone cut off because I didn't pay my phone bill. And I actually had a sticker on my door one time I came back from work, and it says, if you don't pay your electrical bill to Iowa Electric, by tomorrow, we're shutting off your electricity.
That's why I was just asking what our escalation process has been.
Well, all right. Informal NOVs? Yeah. Yeah. Enforcement response plan. Yeah.
Sorry, my mic doesn't have a light, so I have to keep turning it on, seeing if it's on. So in response to Tom's daily email, the last one that I've gotten from Rich was, as explained in ADM's MFRI prior 23rd email to you and discussed on our March 29th meeting with you, ADM continues to take the aggressive actions described in that email to improve the conditions of the wastewater that ADM is delivering to the city plant. We already have completed the actions to stabilize the pH range at our plant's wastewater discharge. ADM continues to work with the city personnel to resolve the issues at the POTW and the ADM facility. ADM will continue to keep you updated as periodic milestones are achieved. If you have any questions, please contact.
So I asked that question because earlier we were talking about, somebody said Tom would always send an email and it was just, you're over or you're out of compliance, blah, blah, blah. And that was all that was said. And then this is what comes back. So I guess my thought is, and I'm not trying to be unkind in any way, shape, or form, but if you get an email from Tom that you're out of compliance every day, then you know you're out of compliance, and your email back isn't any more explicit than his, because that's what that did come out in the conversation. You did say, well, they never tell us, they just send an email. Somebody said they just send an email that we're out of compliance. There's no back and forth, but there is, because he sends it back and he sends that you're out of compliance and you send it back, I know. So there was talk, and both sides did know that there was a problem every time there's an email sent, right?
Let me try. Yes, we're aware we're out of compliance, and we're doing everything we can as diligently as we can to work on it. But I can't stop sending the wastewater unless you want me to shut down. And every time I've reached out by phone to Tom to say, do you want me to shut down? He's like, no. And that has been something that's not in an email, but it's just a check-in. Do I need to shut down? Will you tell me when I need to shut down? I asked that explicitly of Cole in our meeting, because the email says, do everything that you can to stop sending me this. I'm trying, but I'm still sending it to you. So at what point do I just send the same kind of email back to Tom every day saying we're still trying, we're working on it? So, we have had the informal back and forth on where we at, but I know that Tom's obligated to send the email. It's not a problem, by the way. It does tell us at least the plant's still in upset, versus there were a couple of days when it seemed like it might have been doing better, and then it went back into upset again.
Yeah, there
and
were about 3-day stretch, I think it was.
Yeah, but we were
And I did
hopeful.
not send an email those days.
No, you didn't, and we were like, oh, yay. but I don't think anyone was trying to be critical of Tom, just to be clear.
And I'm not saying that, I'm just
Okay.
saying what I'm getting from all the talk and everything is that the city is not totally cooperative and that we're not reaching out like we should. But if Tom's sending an email every day and this email that's going out is going back, Tom and you are cooperating, and I want everybody sitting here to know that there has been cooperation going on from the very start.
There was a period when we were, maybe a misunderstanding, but there was a period where all of a sudden we couldn't talk.
Yes.
And that was confusing to us. And I think some of that has been resolved, you know?
And that my understanding with that is once there's an appeal filed, we can't the conversation has to be between the lawyers, is that right?
Well, no, what it was is the email from Michelle proposed a immediate solution that we still had to evaluate. And as part of that, it said that they asked for relief on the surcharges, and that I felt was outside the parameters of two people talking about a technical issue.
Well,
And that those issues, that technical issues were fine, but communications about relief on the surcharges or anything else needed to come through administration. What it was is there was a poor communication on what could be said or what couldn't be said. We resolved that, and we have been talking on the technical side.
yeah, and let me just be clear. I was proposing a solution that ADM would provide to the city to try to help relieve the treatment stress at the plant at our cost. And so the concept that I floated in that email was, since this is going to cost us X amount, you know, can you work with us on the surcharges? Because we knew we were also going to have that hitting us. So I didn't mean for it to be any kind of a settlement or other kinds of proposal. I was just trying to work through how do we move forward. Yep.
And that's what I'm trying to say is I think that everybody sitting here thinks that we haven't tried to work both sides, and both sides have tried to work. Maybe not everybody in the room, but I know from what Tom's been through and what you've been through, I do believe that there are two people working diligently at it, and maybe not everybody else is included in everything, but there are two people working to solve the problem, and I think everybody here needs to understand that.
I think everybody's just
Okay.
extremely frustrated. And
Yes.
I think there's just confusion along the way.
Yes, thank you.
Cole, before we come to a vote, I noticed, at least on my screen, I still see something. I noticed it's not up there. At one point, and I don't know if this was on, I'd hate to say Susan, but Susan, it is Susan, right? No, that's it is, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if this is her slides or our slides, but I know at one point there was a slide on here that had every appeal just like listed right there. Is there a chance that we could get that up in front of us, or, oh, that is hers? Oh, okay, it is your slide. Okay.
Yeah.
It was. I'm
It's
sorry.
still, no, the
It's
jump
still-
drive, I put my computer away, but
Okay.
actually that wasn't up there anyway. Being a member of the Medicare generation now, I know enough just to be dangerous on computers too.
I think that's it.
Is that
Yes.
it? Oh, damn it. Oh, excuse me.
That would be, only because I was going to ask the mayor to go over, or Cole to go over it one more time. I wrote it down, but I wanted to make sure I had the right ones before we went through.
Sorry. Can you go over what piece we're voting on? Like, as you go through the numbers, granting means yay or nay to it?
So what I would, and you don't, and what it is you don't need a motion on this. What you do is if you want to go part by part, is that what you'd like to do? Or would you like to consider it as the whole thing, the appeal as a whole? If you want to go part by part, that's easy. I'll just say, you know, number one, and this is what it is. And
Probably the
then
best
there would
way.
have to be a roll call vote, either yes to grant the appeal or no to deny the appeal. Okay? Does everybody understand?
I'd like to go part by part.
Okay, so we will go part by part, so there are 4 parts. Okay? And again, when I ask it, yes is to grant the appeal, no is to deny. Okay? What I will also do at the end is I will add a 5th one, which is to direct staff to negotiate a consent order. Okay? Everybody clear? Now on the fifth one, yes means you want us to do the consent order. No, you do not. Okay?
Getting ready to vote.
Wait. bef- Okay, I got it all written down.
Okay.
There. I don't know if this is good to do, but is there a way, now that we have this up in front of us, there's been a lot of talk, it's been a long little bit. I don't need to talk to nobody, I'm not trying to. I would love just a minute or two to collect my thoughts and how you know what I mean? Like, just, I don't want to talk
Okay,
to Roger and
so-
them, but
So would you like a 5-minute recess?
sure, whatever we
Okay.
can, I would. I don't know if anybody else does. I would love to, I mean, I'm not trying to prolong it. I don't need 5 minutes, but I just want to make sure I got it right. I don't want to mess up. That's all I'm asking.
So that would be a 5-minute recess. We will be back here at 8:35, 8:36.
You can say goodnight, right?
It's hard, but a little bit. I bet better than I've had doors.
But to make it down to dischargeable strength, I mean, could do it. Pipeline, permanent, I gotta get it all up. I'd rather not have to put all the infrastructure in place. And you could build it Real technology is designed to do things. It shouldn't have been, but it just, it's something about Exactly. Thank you, that's. I'm just. Are you sure? You enjoy the ride? And I think. Then you just spray it.
That's awesome, yeah. Reminds me of the kids. There you go. Thank you. Been a long night. Yeah.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. Rich Stevens?
Gina Jennings, yeah, nice to meet you.
I like a lot of the words.
Oh, good, thanks. I thought you stuck over my ground. Well, you,
See the rapids area? Wrap up pretty soon. I'm trying to go back home tonight, so. It's not bad. It's an easy drive. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, we'll see. No, this is, it'll be fine.
Brian, I don't think I've ever met you.
I don't believe so. Pleasure meeting you.
I should know this, but I guess I wanted to do
Mayor, sorry, just looking there. Managed there 3 years. I've been in the K for 5. I've been with ADM. I've been with 3 years.
One additional point. Would it help you? Not actually, but maybe not. Obviously, we think the fines are just. I know we have.
Are we ready to get back at it? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Cole and we're going to vote unless there's anything else anybody needs to say or do or whatever.
Cool. Before we get to a vote, I've got just a couple of things I'd like to clarify. First off, if the council denies an appeal or grants an appeal on any of the provisions, Does that restrict what can be taken in the consent order?
No.
Does not. Okay. And then secondly, then when we get to each provision that we vote on, can we have a quick synopsis of if we vote no, what happens? If we vote yes, what happens? Like the
Yes.
outcome of the
Yes.
vote, what it would pertain to.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So the first vote is on the request to declare the permit amendment invalid. What this would do is set the ADM pretreatment levels to the permit issued in November of 2021. Any further clarification? Okay. Celeste, if you want to call the roll.
Garcia,
Yes.
Nguyen,
Yes.
Hellenthal,
Mayor, I'm gonna abstain because of my employment.
Andrews,
Yes.
Marsden,
Yes.
Bryant,
Yes.
Greenwald,
No.
What I tally is 5 granting the appeal, 1 denying the appeal, and 1 abstaining. Is that correct?
correct.
Okay. So on the first, the appeal is granted. Second, relief on the new limits in the administrative order. What that does is, again, provides ADM to discharge at levels of the November 2021 permit.
Is-
The limits in the AO reduced their permit levels on BOD and TSS by 20%. And so what they're asking is that not be enforced. So
Would this be a moot point? Because can they not? I thought they couldn't be enforced in a.
no. This one, what it is on the administrative order, what we said is that we would reduce their discharge levels by 20% from the November 2021 permit.
But can they be enforced?
I believe that our attorney says that it
I
can.
thought he said they couldn't. They were just in there.
My point was that I found nothing in that AO section of our code that specifically said that you could not put permit limits in an AO.
But these aren't the permit limits.
Discharge limits, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
So are you saying we can't put,
I'm saying my point was that when I read that section involving administrative orders, that I didn't see anything in that section that specifically prohibited an administrative order from addressing discharge limits. And Susan has a different reading of that.
So my interpretation from what we're looking at with this particular vote is since we have approved the first appeal, that means that the amended limits that we set forth, those are now, that amendment is gone. So we are back to the original November permit. With this next item, if we approve the appeal, the November permit is in effect until we come to new numbers, as we have discussed, like both parties need to do. If we deny this appeal on this next item, then the new permit numbers would then go to what was in the AO, which is the 20% lower than November, but higher than the amended one that we've already taken off the table.
correct?
If I may, just briefly, the point that I disagree with Jim on is that in another section, and it's in our written appeal, of your ordinance says discharge limits shall be contained in either a permit or permit amendment. It doesn't go on to say, or is a requirement of an AO. That's the difference of opinion.
Any further clarification? Okay. So go ahead and call the roll.
Garcia,
Yes.
Nguyen,
No.
Hellenthal,
Mayor, I'll abstain for the same reasons before.
Andrews,
Yes.
Marsden,
Yes.
Bryant,
Yes.
Greenwald,
No.
I show 4 granting, 4 denying, 1 abstaining. That would constitute it doesn't need to be a supermajority, so that constitutes a majority. Okay. Number 3 is appealing the 14-day requirement for the RCA. The RCA has already been submitted. It's a moot point. Do you still want to vote?
I would like to say ADM did request to
Mm-hmm.
change this just so that on their side, they can show that they followed.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to still vote on this.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So call the roll.
Garcia,
Yes.
Nguyen,
Yes.
Hellenthal,
Abstain?
Andrews,
Yes.
Marsden,
No.
Bryant,
Yes.
Greenwald,
Yes.
I show 5 granting, 1 denying, 1 abstaining. Okay. Item 4, relief or denial of the imposing of fines of more than $1,000 per day or per violation, and the passing of any EPA or DNR fines onto ADM.
Can we?
So what it is we could not pass on any fines that we receive from EPA or DNR, and the maximum that we can impose of our fines are $1,000 per day or per violation.
Cole,
Yes.
can we split that up? If I made a motion to split it? To split it into.
Did split it into 2?
Into 2, where the administrative order contains provisions, or that has the fines, to where we cannot propose any EPA fines, like as 2 separate.
You want
Are
them
we allowed-
separate?
Are we allowed to grant something that is not in an ordinance? I mean, like, can we deny an appeal going against an ordinance?
Jim, can you remind us your stance that you said on the passing along of EPA or DNR fines? You said that no, in your opinion, that was not something that we can do.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
We can't even vote on that if it's not lawful to do that.
And Jim,
But only that last part is unlawful,
that
which is
part.
why I'm saying that we should split it into 2.
I just think the one part is
Or
moot.
not, I don't want to say unlawful, but under our attorneys, like, that's why I say to split it into 2. If we are advised not to do if the EPA, then I motion to take that as a separate issue, as a separate part, and have the March 2022 administrative order that contains fines be its own separate to the March 2020.
but the ADM is not appealing that we cannot issue a fine. What they're saying is that we cannot issue a fine greater than $1,000. This is what the AO says.
Right.
Okay. And I believe that Jim agrees that that's what our ordinance says. So in both instances, our attorney has said that this portion of the administrative order does not comply.
I thought,
It was, what it is he clarified he clarified what ADM presented, in that what he says is that our ordinance says that we can assess a fine of $1,000 per day or per violation. Okay? ADM says that we cannot issue a fine greater than $1,000. So what it is the language that says that we can issue greater than $1,000 is not within our capacity. What Jim says is that no, we can't do it more than $1,000, but we can still do it $1,000 per day or per violation. Correct?
Correct.
So
You did not.
what
say-
I'm saying, what I'm saying is that the fine language that's within the AO, it cannot be contained in the AO, so they do not need to be separated. Okay? All right. Go ahead and call the roll.
Garcia,
Yes.
Quinn,
Yes.
Hellenthal,
Abstain?
Andrews,
Yes.
Marsden,
Yes.
Bryant,
Yes.
Greenwald,
Yes.
I show 6 yes, 1 abstaining. So the last matter is instructing staff to begin negotiations with ADM on a consent order. And in this instance, a yes vote is yes, you will instruct us to do so. No, you will not instruct us to do so.
Do you need a motion?
Yes, that would need to be a motion.
I would like to make the motion for staff to engage with ADM in
Second.
hopes of a consent order agreement.
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I think it's over. Do I need a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Let's go.
I will second.